But the Bohemian IMAX is what you live within. Now, the interesting thing is, within the Bohemian IMAX, every possible life that you could live has been recorded. And again, the science behind that I go into in great detail in my books. But it's like you're living within a computer, first-person computer DVD game of your life. And programmed within the life is every possible scenario of every single decision you can make in your life. So basically that is cheating the ferryman. The reason I call it cheating the ferryman is going back to the ancient Greek myth that when somebody, well, it's not a myth, but it's a tradition that in ancient Greek times when somebody died, they would place a small coin called an obolus underneath the tongue of the corpse. This was in order to pay the ferryman, because the corpse, when they found themselves at the other side, as it were, they would find themselves in front of a huge river. And out of the river's mists would come Charon the boatman. And the idea was that the shade, the dead person, would take the obolus coin, or the oboli, and he would or she would pay the ferryman to take them over to the land of the dead. I argue you cheat the ferryman. You never pay him the fee, because you never get to the point of death. Okay?
So essentially what you're saying is it's just the time slows down to such an extent, and then the reliving just carries on and over again.
Over and over again, so, like in Groundhog Day, the movie.
Absolutely.
In fact, I was going to call the book Groundhog Life at one stage, because you remember in that movie he lives the same day over and over and over again. I suggest
it's another great film. It's another one of the great ones.
In fact, again, somebody that's on the periphery of my forum is a guy called Danny Rubin, who actually wrote the screenplay. So we have some really big people on there, and I keep stressing to anybody out there who's interested, get involved in this. It's getting bigger and bigger. But anyway, going back to that, so cheating the ferryman is the idea that you live your life over and over again. But when you're living the life again, there is part of you that remembers the last life. And that part of you I call the daemon. Other people will call it your guardian angel, your higher self, your inner voice, your over-self. Many, many terms are used for it, but it's the same being. It's you, but it's that voice in your head that tells you you should do something or not do something. In my second book, I have cases after cases of individuals from around the world who have written to me, giving me examples of the voice in their head that saved their lives. But little was I to know that between the writing of my first and second book, I was going to have the most classic example of my own hypothesis happen to me. And this is a really true story. Around about 1987, 88, I bought a magazine that I regularly bought called Q. It's a rock magazine. You're probably aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they used to give free CDs on the cover. And one particular day, I was living in Colchester in Essex at the time, and I picked up a copy of Q magazine, and I took it home with me, and I put the CD on. And the third or fourth track on the CD hit me like I couldn't believe. Now, this is way before I ever thought about writing a book or anything. This is years ago. And there's one track on there called Round of Blues, written by an American singer-songwriter called Sean Colvin. This song is really upbeat. It's got a really superb bass line. It's a very, very good song. Not anything like I reacted to it. I turned round to my then common-law wife and I said, I don't know why, but I want this played at my funeral. and Jenny turned round to me and she said, what do you mean? Why? And I said, I don't know. This is my funeral song.
It just felt right.
It felt right. And she said, really? And I said, we're going out on Saturday to change my will to actually put this in my will. I was so important to me. So after
and this was a similar urge that you got to that taught you had to write a book.
I had to write the book. It was the same. It was the demonic influence. It was the voice in the head. It was the guiding light. It was the muse, as it were, that creative people call it. But I didn't know what that meant. And it was a mystery to me for years and years and years as to why that was. When unfortunately my previous relationship ended and I ended up with my now present wife, one of the first things I said to her when we got together, I played her that song and I said, this is my funeral song. And again, she goes, what? And I said, no, please, this is so profoundly important. So again, we went and we put it in my will to make sure it was my funeral song. Even then I thought, I don't know why I'm doing this. So I then write the first book, and I have this grand theory, or the grand hypothesis about what's happening, but I still didn't see any significance. Now, around about 7 years ago, I'd yet to get the first deal on the book, but it looked like I was going to get a publisher for my first book.
Okay.
I was Divisional Human Resources Manager for Nuffield Hospitals, and I was responsible for a series of about 10 or 12 hospitals in the north of England. And
right, yeah.
I was living in Harrogate at the time, and I was driving across from Harrogate to Chester to go to a meeting at our Chester Hospital the next day. And I was driving along the M62, and as I came along the top of the M62 at a place called Milne Row, it was November and it was very misty. Now, in my car, I'm a music freak. I have around about 16,000 MP3s on my MP3 player.
That's impressive.
It's something called an Arcos. I mean, my latest one now is 250 gigabytes. These are, forget your iPods. These things are a different planet. They're absolutely fantastic things.
I used to have one of those early versions of one of those a few
you
years
did?
back.
Yeah, the Arcos is. I've traded up each one as they've come out. I've got the latest version. I think they're absolutely brilliant. And I've got a huge CD collection and tape collection, and it's all being digitized on there. Now, whenever I was on business traveling, I would always have this on random play. So there's 16,000 tracks on there, and I have it on random play. The Sean Colvin song had never, ever come up on random play, which is not surprising, 1 in 16,000 chance. However much you drop, it's going to be unlikely. I'm driving along the M62, fog banks in front of me, and then suddenly, out of the blue, the tracks change, and it's Round of Blues comes on. Immediately, now that I'd written my book, and I thought, significant coincidence, because I believe that nowadays, because I have a term called synchronidity, which is synchronicities that are significant. So it's synchronidity. Absolutely. And I felt this is a synchronidipitous event. There's a reason why this tune has come on now. So what I did was I quickly turned into the slow lane. And I had this beautiful RX-8 car. I don't know if you know the RX-8s, but they're really fast, beautiful car. But that's an aside. So I turned the car in, and as I did so, the lorry in front of me had a load of crash barriers on it. And the crash barriers crashed off the back of the lorry into the lane that I would have been in.
Amazing.
I would have been killed. The reason that song was my death song was not because I associated it with my death, was not because I wanted it at my funeral, but at my last run of the Boney and IMAX, it was the last thing I ever heard in my life.
Awesome.
So clearly, my earlier self, back in 1989, had recognised, my Damon recognised that song and thought, what do I know about that song? And he thought, my God, that's the song. He dies. It tried to get a message through to me, but because sometimes the communication channels between your daemon, which is your higher self, and your eidolon, which is the lower self, aren't that open, it gets garbled. And I read it as being my funeral song. And it was after that event, and I thought, my God, that is absolute proof for me, if ever I needed proof, that cheating the ferryman works. It's that.
Absolutely, first hand. You can't really argue
experience.
With that.
To me, that was, a kind of we have this on my forum when we discuss synchronidipitous events. What amuses us is how they're rooted. You'll never just get one thing happen. You'll get these jokes of synchronicities where you see the synchronicity, and it's only about an hour later you burst out laughing because you think, oh, I didn't get that. There was a joke within a joke within a joke.
Yeah, now, absolutely.
I then found, and we discussed this before, that the book itself had been written effectively. My whole life had been built up to write that book because I started to find events that Jung called it the library angel, what I would find is there would be things I would need when I was researching the first book, and I'd find them in my own book collection. I wouldn't need to go out and research them. They were already there. But there were two or three events that happened while I was writing the book that defied description. The first one was that I was writing about mitochondria. Now, mitochondria are sort of structures within all cells of the body.
Right.
But mitochondrial DNA is different to normal DNA. Strangely enough, it runs through the female line. And I was intrigued by mitochondrial DNA. And at that time, I went off on so many different tangents on writing the book, because the one thing that if people read my book, they will realize everything I say is based in hard science. If you read my books, every single thing I say is referenced back to books, to research material. You will get the number, you will get the page to check that what I'm saying, whether it's complete rubbish or not. I let my readers make their own decisions on that. But what I did was I needed to understand mitochondrial DNA. So I thought, where on my bookcase will I find that? So I'm a great fan. Strangely enough, although people might find this hard, I'm a huge fan of Richard Dawkins.
All right, okay.
Massive fan of Richard Dawkins. And I have all his books. And at that stage, I thought, he's the only person I know that will probably write about mitochondrial DNA. So I went to his books, and I thought probably The Blind Watchmaker is probably the book he will have written about. Now, I had read The Blind Watchmaker 10 years before on a beach on a tiny island in Greece called Symi.
Right.
Okay, now, one thing you need to know about me is I never ever dog-ear pages of books. I never ever do it. It's something I cannot stand doing.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
So I take the book out of the bookcase, and as I look at the book, there is only one page that's got a dog ear, and I knew with absolute certainty what was going to be on that page. And I opened the page, and there was the dog ear, and I read down, and it's Dawkins talking about mitochondrial DNA. My earlier self, on a beach, I'd probably stopped to go up for lunch. And my earlier self, 10 years before, had gone, right, I'm going to leave that little clue for you subliminally because you didn't even know you've done it. So you will find it.
Yeah, your previous self did the unthinkable and left a dog-ear clue for you.
Left a clue to myself to say, this is what I will leave for you to spot in your own future. But the weirdest one, and this still blows my mind, unfortunately my wife witnessed this. I needed to get hold of a copy of the book Man and Time by J.B. Priestley. Living in Horsham at the time, I couldn't get hold of a copy anywhere. There was no copies available in bookshops or in my local library. So I went into Horsham Library, and all this is dated because Horsham Library will have the records of this. I needed a copy, so I ordered it from the British Library in Boston Spa in Yorkshire. They send the reference off, and it takes a week or two for the book to come back. I'm in my study one day, the phone rings. Pick up the phone, it's Horsham Library, and they say, Man and Time has just arrived from the British Library, when can you come and pick it up? I said, within the next 2 or 3 days. I've had various other books to read at the time, and I eventually freed up from the books, and about 3 or 4 days later I made my way to Horsham Library. I then pick the book up and I take it back home. I place the book unopened on my study desk. 3 or 4 days later, I'm off to bed, and I'm one of these people, I can't be not reading. So as I was going to bed, I thought, oh, there's that book, Man and Time. I'll pick it up and I'll flick through it. Myself and my wife sitting in bed, and this book's got about 250 pages in it. I'm flicking through the pages at random, and I just open the page at random, and I start reading down the page. And J.B. Priestley is describing the concept that light takes time to travel from one point to another, 186,000 miles per second. And he said, so therefore, what you're viewing now, when you look at a star, is how many light years it was away and how long ago in the past you're looking. But he turns around and he says, but don't take my word for it. I'll quote somebody else. And there's a little quotation box. Now, Priestley wrote that book in 1963, maybe 64. He quotes a book written by a guy called James Coleman. It was James, or somebody called Coleman anyway.